I forgive you, Kevin. If that is not the last time we will hear your voice in this nave. Is that a deal? All right. He gave me a thumbs up. Yeah. And I would love to hear the rocks cry out glory and honor. But so much better to see us all too busy feeding the poor. Thank you, Erwin. Wonderful. Well, I've forgiven, and we've all forgiven Kevin Vandiver because he's responding to the call of God to move on in the ministry that is laid out for him. But I still haven't forgiven Leroy. That boy used to beat me up for practice. He didn't even bother taking my lunch money. He just beat me up every time he saw me. At least that's what it seemed like. So I'm not having this passage. No way. We cannot be asked to take this parable seriously. Some things cannot be forgiven. It's preposterous, ridiculous. 70 times 7, the number signifying perfection, completeness. And let's be clear what it means, this 70 times 7. What it means is over and over and over and over. We forgive. It might not be a merciless boy who ruined elementary school for you, but I'm guessing there is in your history a memory, an occurrence, a thing that happened, or a catalog of wounds, indignities, hurts inflicted that weigh upon you, now resting uneasily upon your heart, in your mind, troubling even your soul. You might be mad at God about the very condition of your being. I've gotten over it a long time now, but I'm too short for the NBA career I thought I could have had. I was that good. Though that's more my parents than God, both short like me. But maybe it's your color, or your gender, or your sexual orientation. You know, you're white and male and straight, and the debt you owe for white privilege is finally coming due. And who can you see about that? Maria Sharapova might have some dark nights wrestling with that question when she gets off her book tour. See Nancy if you need some context, some backstory on that. But you know what I mean. The loss of a loved one too soon, the shattered remains of a family after an ugly divorce, the freak accident that changes the course of a life, the deadly pattern of systemic injustices that devalue some lives and privilege others, the toxic residue of a childhood raised by an alcoholic parent, the brutality of spousal or partner or child abuse, that sense that the world is no longer a safe place, the willful lies and disingenuous innocence and ignorance that keep things as they are, condemning the same folks to second-class citizenship, leftover resources, porous opportunities, never enough to do much more than stay in the same place with no hope of getting ahead. Matthew, Jesus, no, thank you. Some things cannot be forgiven. We're in this On the Way with Jesus series, and this text does not make it easy for us to keep up. In the very first verse, our suspicions are raised with Peter's reference to a member of the church. What church? There was no church. After the resurrection, Peter will be the rock upon which the church will be built, but that hasn't happened yet. Pastor Amy talked about this oddity last week, and here it is again. We give the NRSV translators and Matthew a pass because when Matthew wrote, there was a small but vibrant and growing church, but that is at least 50 years after Jesus was gone. It just bears remembering that we're reading post-resurrection realities into a real-time Jesus narrative. But beyond that, the parable is filled with wildly exaggerated dimensions that just begin with the requirement to forgive 70 times 7, owing 10,000 talents. That's ridiculous. A talent is roughly equal to 15 to 20 years of the salary of a day laborer. So 10,000? That's 200,000 years of work. That's the size of that ridiculous debt. Selling a family into slavery for an unpaid debt? Or how can you repay your debt if you're being tortured? It's also over the top. We just can't relate to it. Sure, it's a story to make a point, but it ought to have some credibility in its details, don't you think? This would be like, I tried to think about contemporary analogies. This would be like a Congress full of millionaires giving themselves raises while voting to cut off food stamps for the poorest among us and not raising the minimum wage. This would be like a president with immigrant roots and married to an immigrant, acting to deny residency, legal status, a path to citizenship for kids brought here from other countries. Or this would be like Christians descendant from a history of genocide of a native population and slavery built on escalating violence and death to increase cotton production, calling Muslims violent because of a minority of Islamic extremists. Or this would be like describing the relationship of Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson as a May-December romance. It would be like Christian leaders forgiven for serious breaches of integrity, yet preaching that gays, lesbians, transgender persons don't belong in the church, can't marry, or be ordained to ministry. Get real, Jesus. That's just fake news. You know, we just can't point at others. Who among us is without sin? Jesus famously asked a hostile crowd about to stone a woman accused of infidelity. We're in that crowd. We're all in that crowd. I know I am. God has, I suppose, but I've never forgiven myself for not responding to a college friend who reached out to me for comfort and support years later with what I thought was yet another among many overly dramatic stories he told me throughout our days in college, more made up than real. This time about his impending death. Some disease he had that no one had ever heard of. I don't know what he wanted exactly, maybe just for me to listen and believe him, to be the friend I once was. Well, he died of AIDS in the mid-'80s. Within the year of our last conversation, I never saw him again. Theologian Bruce Epperly writes, "We are all a part of a dynamic ecology of imperfection and grace, in which no one stands alone. There is no other. We cannot demonize Egyptians, Palestinians, Israelis, North Koreans, and either law enforcement officers or those who are slain by them, justly or unjustly. We may even have to forgive political leaders whose policies we believe to be destructive to the body politic. This doesn't mean we acquiesce to their positions. We may need to picket and protest, but we must still see them as God's beloved and broken children. There is no other." Now, let's get real. I'm simply not capable of forgiving Trump for anything at the moment. The time is not right in the middle of his reckless campaign of lies and destruction. He is protecting and advancing an infrastructure of impunity, to use a phrase from Arundhati Roy's new novel. The truth must be told. Countermeasures must be implemented. Persistent resistance is mandatory. But he too is a child of God, broken, and a threat to the whole world, yet a child of God. The time will come. If I forget to forgive, if we can't forgive, if we refuse to forgive, we get mired in a spiraling descent into a narrow and graceless world lacking warmth and intimacy. Our light is dimmed. Our souls are earthbound and disconnected from the communion of saints whose rich history nourishes and enriches our lives. Here's the equation. God forgives us, we forgive others. Here's the underlying math. It's a word problem in the form of a question. If a member of the church, if a brother or sister, if a member of the church sins against me, how often, not do I have to, but how often should I forgive? And here's the ridiculous answer. Over and over and over again. Maybe that means until we get it right, until we really mean it. Maybe it means however many times it takes to be necessary to restore, to reconcile, to repair the breach, to make whole again what has been broken. And lastly, friends, forgiveness is required. Yes, faith is voluntary. Church membership is voluntary. We are free to join or not to join, to participate with gladness and good spirit or not, to give of our resources out of a sense of our gratitude to a generous God or not. We are free to work for justice for all the people of God or not. We are free to believe we are saved by grace or not, to love because it is the power of life or not. What sense would any of it make if we did not have a choice? May not make sense, but here it is. Me, you, we are free not to forgive. But I am, you, we are lost if we don't. Joy, justice, peace are on the other side of forgiveness. A new world waits. That's enough for me. What about you?